They say betrayal starts with a whisper. But for me, it was a silence. A heavy, loaded kind of quiet that settled over our home like fog creeping through the vines of our Napa Valley vineyard. The kind that makes you sit still and ask yourself if the life you've built, the love, the friendship, the trust, was ever real or just a beautiful lie dressed in wine-stained smiles. I'm Elena Grayson, 47, co-owner of Grayson Vineyards, one of the rising stars in Northern California's wine country. I've spent 20 years married to Daniel Grayson, the man I thought would grow old with me beneath the olive trees, sipping Cabernet and laughing at the absurdities of life. I used to believe in the myth of us. That myth shattered the day I found out he was sleeping with Maya Carlson, my best friend of 15 years, the woman who toasted our anniversary with us, the woman who held my hand when I miscarried our first child, the woman who knew my fears, my past, my secrets. She knew the man I married better than anyone. And apparently, she decided she wanted him for herself. It didn't start with lipstick, on a collar, or a mysterious receipt from a hotel I'd never heard of. It started with the way they looked at each other. Fleeting, but familiar. Too familiar. The way they both laughed a second too long at a joke that wasn't funny. The way Daniel started coming home late, saying the vines needed tending. Funny. I'd been in the vineyard all day. Nothing needed tending but his lies. Maya had been helping us rebrand the vineyard. She was brilliant at marketing, a creative soul with a magnetic smile, and I was proud to have her by my side as we expanded our business. She had ideas, vision, energy. I didn't realize then that she was pouring it all into Daniel. There's a specific ache that comes with suspecting betrayal, especially when it's wrapped in friendship. You tell yourself you're being paranoid, that you're insecure, that surely not them, that they'd never. But betrayal isn't a thunderclap. It's a slow drip, a leaky roof you pretend you can live with until one day the ceiling collapses. That day came with a simple mistake, a forgotten iPad. Maya had borrowed mine the week before to upload some promotional videos. She'd logged into her iMessages and never logged out. I wasn't snooping. I was looking for a file. And then, like a cruel twist of fate, a message appeared on the screen. Last night was perfect. I can still taste your skin. The contact name. DI stared at the screen, not breathing, as the device vibrated again. She suspects nothing. Let's talk tonight. Same place. I didn't cry. Not then. Not immediately. Something deeper than tears took hold. A sharp, icy stillness, like the quiet inside a church just before a funeral begins. I scrolled through. Weeks of messages, pictures, jokes about me, plans to ease me out of the vineyard. The woman who held my bouquet at my wedding was now plotting my exit from the life I had built with my own hands. I shut the iPad, placed it on the kitchen table, and stared out the window into the vineyard that stretched for acres. It looked the same as it had the day before. Sunlight filtering through the vines, birds fluttering near the olive trees. The land we had cultivated together, Daniel and I. But something had changed. Me. I realized in that moment that love is not what keeps people loyal. It's accountability. It's character. And neither of them had any left. I didn't scream. I didn't confront. I didn't fall to pieces. I planned. That night, I lay in bed beside the man who had betrayed me. I listened to the steady rhythm of his breath. I studied the hands that once built trellises with me in the summer heat, now tainted with the warmth of someone else. I knew something with bone-deep certainty. If I was going to burn, I'd make sure they went up in flames with me, not in a fit of rage, not through messy, impulsive revenge, but something slower, more deliberate. I would become the woman neither of them saw coming, the one who would dismantle their little affair piece by calculated piece. Daniel had no idea that I had seen the messages. No idea that I'd already transferred partial ownership of our brand assets to a secondary LLC, registered in my maiden name. No idea that I'd secretly met with a top lawyer in San Francisco, one who specialized in marital asset protection and business dissolution. You see, Daniel and I had signed a prenup when we got married. At the time, it was more of a formality, something his parents insisted on. But I had asked for one clause in return: infidelity forfeits community property claims. He'd agreed, brushing it off with a laugh. If I ever cheat on you, I deserve to be penniless. I intended to make him eat those words. Maya? She didn't even know she'd walked into a trap. A woman who builds her identity around being desired never sees when she's being watched. I kept smiling, kept inviting her over for tastings, kept pretending I didn't notice the way she watched Daniel when she thought I wasn't looking. There's power in pretending to be ignorant. Power in allowing them to believe they're smarter than you. Every dinner we shared, every clink of wine glasses, every fake smile I offered was another brick in the wall I was building, the wall that would one day shut them both out. And while they snuck off to hotel rooms and crafted their fantasy life, I was creating my own reality. One where I wasn't the victim. One where I came out stronger, smarter, richer, and alone, by choice, not by rejection. That was the week I changed the locks on the vineyard's filing system. Updated passwords. Quietly redirected deliveries to my new bottling partner in Sonoma under the brand name Alara Wines, a name inspired by a Greek mythological figure who survived betrayal by rising from ruin. I wasn't Elena the wife anymore. I was Alara the creator, the storm in silk. This story isn't just about cheating. It's about being underestimated, about being the quiet one in the room, the supportive partner, the best friend. Until the moment you realize they've mistaken your kindness for weakness. I let them write their story. I just waited to deliver the final chapter, and it's coming. If you're still with me, and your heart is racing just a little, good. That means you felt it. The sting of betrayal, the weight of silence, the chill of a calculated breath in the dark. This is only the beginning. And what happens next will shock you. Make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next part of this unbelievable true story. Every comment, like, and follow helps us bring you more powerful, real-life stories of betrayal, resilience, and ultimate justice. Mini quiz. What would you do if you discovered your partner was cheating with your best friend? A. Confront them both immediately in a dramatic showdown. B. Stay silent, plan carefully, and make your move when they least expect it. Comment your answer below, A or B, and tell us why. We'll feature the best responses in the next video, the dia. Morning after discovering the messages, the world seemed unchanged on the surface. Sunlight still filtered through the curtains of our bedroom. The birds in the vineyard sang their usual morning chorus. Daniel stirred beside me, groggy, mumbling about needing coffee before checking on the fermentation tanks. The man who had unknowingly betrayed every fiber of my trust was already planning his day. But so was I. While he went about his routine, I sat at the kitchen island, sipping my espresso and opening my laptop. The cold light from the screen did nothing to thaw the heaviness in my chest. The ache hadn't disappeared. It had simply evolved. Grief had turned into precision. Emotion had calcified into purpose. I searched for one name, Grace Lindholm. I hadn't spoken to Grace since college, but I remembered two things vividly: her razor-sharp mind and the way she dismantled opposing arguments in our ethics class, like a seasoned lawyer, which years later is exactly what she had become. She specialized in high-asset divorces and business protections in San Francisco. If anyone could help me protect what I built, it was Grace. She picked up on the second ring. I didn't cry or scream or tell her everything at once. I simply said, "I need you to help me disappear from a man's life, piece by piece, without him noticing until it's too late." There was a pause. Then, When can you be in my office?" That afternoon, I drove to the city. Napa Valley faded in my rearview mirror as I crossed the Golden Gate, the weight of 20 years pressing down on my spine. Grace welcomed me with a hug that didn't feel like pity. It felt like respect. The kind only women who've walked through fire can give one another. We spent hours drafting a strategy. We combed through the prenup, line by line. I learned that I was in a far stronger position than I had ever realized. The infidelity clause wasn't just enforceable, it was airtight. It gave me legal grounds to claim sole ownership of our shared assets, especially those acquired during our marriage. But legal power was only half the battle. What I needed now was leverage, financial, emotional, strategic. I couldn't just cut Daniel off. I needed to make sure that when I did, he would have nowhere to land. Grace helped me restructure parts of the vineyard's ownership. We created a new holding company, Elara Ventures, LLC, and began transferring intellectual property, branding elements, and digital assets under its umbrella. I would remain co-owner of Grayson Vineyards on paper, but my future brand, the legacy I was about to build, would be mine alone. I signed NDAs with my accountant and our operations manager. They didn't ask questions, but their eyes said enough. They suspected. Maybe they'd seen something I hadn't. Or maybe, like me, they'd learned to keep their heads down while betrayal bloomed behind oak barrels and tasting menus. The next few weeks were quiet. At least on the surface. Daniel continued his affair in secrecy, unaware that every text, every transaction, every whispered plan was being documented. Maya remained a fixture in our vineyard life, pitching ideas, joining dinners, sharing wine in the tasting room like nothing had changed. I let them dance. I let them laugh. I let them dig their own graves while I gathered the shovels. But in private, I was building something that neither of them saw coming. I took my first solo trip in years, to Oregon's Willamette Valley, where I visited vineyards and met with a group of sustainable winemakers who specialized in female-led production. I listened, I learned, I asked questions. Not as Elena Grayson, co-founder of Grayson Vineyards, but as Elara, the name I was slowly adopting for a life that didn't include betrayal. I started journaling again. At night, while Daniel slept beside me, I poured out every emotion. Rage, heartbreak, clarity. The silence between us had grown deafening, but I played my part. I asked about his day. I kissed him goodnight. I didn't want to alert him. Not yet. Because I wasn't just planning a divorce. I was planning a legacy. In those quiet moments, I began imagining the next version of myself. Not the wife betrayed. Not the partner abandoned. But the woman who would redefine herself on her own terms. My son Luca called one night from his apartment in Boston. He's 24 now, deep in the grind of med school. We talked for nearly an hour. I didn't tell him about the affair. Not yet. But I did tell him I was working on something new. "I'm proud of you, Mom," he said. That sentence alone reminded me why I couldn't break down. I owed it to him, not just to survive, but to rise. The transformation wasn't only financial or legal. It was physical, spiritual. I rejoined my old yoga class. I found a therapist and started processing the betrayal from every angle. I wasn't just focused on revenge. I was invested in renewal. And with every small decision, I reclaimed pieces of myself that had been buried under years of compromise. One Saturday morning, Maya and Daniel hosted a small team brunch at the vineyard. I stood there, watching them laugh over mimosas and goat cheese crostinis, and felt nothing. No jealousy, no despair, just cold calculation. They were comfortable. They believed they were untouchable. That's exactly what I needed. The team saw me working more late nights at the office, drafting documents, checking contracts. I pretended it was just end-of-year stress. In reality, I was reviewing every agreement Daniel had ever signed. I knew where the weaknesses were, where the liabilities hid. He had cut corners before. I had forgiven him for it in the name of partnership. I wouldn't be doing that again. Then came the meeting with our largest distributor, the one who accounted for nearly 40% of our vineyard's revenue. I sat across from their regional director in a quiet bistro in San Jose and made my pitch. "I'm launching something new," I said, "and I want you in early." He raised an eyebrow. "Does Daniel know?" "Not yet," I answered. "But he will. In time." I left that meeting with a handshake and a verbal agreement that the moment Alara Wines launched, he would move half their shelf space to my new label. Quiet power is the most dangerous kind. The kind that doesn't announce itself. The kind that arrives when it's too late to stop. Maya, for all her charm, had no idea what was coming. She thought she'd won something. She didn't realize. She'd stepped into a chess match where every move had already been made. At night, I would sit by the window with a glass of wine, no longer for comfort, but for clarity. I'd sip and listen to the quiet hum of the vineyard, the creaking of old wood, the distant sound of trucks on the service road. This was my home, my legacy. I had cultivated every vine, fought for every deal, built every wall of this house. And soon, I would be the only one standing in it. The hardest part wasn't pretending. It was realizing how easily I had allowed my own erasure for the sake of harmony. How many times had I silenced my instincts? How many times had I smiled through suspicion? That's what betrayal does. It makes you question not just them, but yourself. But no more. By the end of that month, I had created a full digital archive of all the incriminating evidence. Text messages, travel receipts, hotel bookings, even private emails Maya had sent from her business account to Daniel. All of it, cataloged, time-stamped. Ready. Grace called me one evening. "Everything is in place," she said. "When you're ready, we file." "Not yet," I replied. One more thing. There was one last piece to prepare. Me. I wasn't going into this as a woman scorned. I was going into it as a woman with a plan. One who had spent her life building something real, only to watch it be treated like an accessory. Like something optional, disposable. I remember standing in front of the mirror that night, tracing the fine lines by my eyes, the soft silver near my temples. I didn't mourn them. I honored them. Every line was earned. Every scar remembered. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't see heartbreak when I looked at my reflection. I saw a woman who had stayed quiet long enough. Soon, I would speak, and when I did, it would be with actions no apology could ever undo. Because when a man shows you who he really is, believe him. And when a woman decides she's done being underestimated, run. It started with Maya. For weeks, I had played my role. Calm, composed, even gracious. I let them live in their fantasy while I quietly dismantled the stage beneath their feet. But on a cold Wednesday morning, I decided it was time to stop pretending. Maya had stopped by the vineyard office to review our spring campaign. She wore the same confidence she always did, the one that used to inspire me. That day, it disgusted me. She was dressed in a crisp white blazer, sipping the espresso I had prepared, laughing too loudly, acting as if we were still the best friends we once were. She didn't know that her betrayal had already been dissected, documented, and weaponized. Watched her across the desk and waited until her laughter faded into an awkward silence. I opened the drawer beside me, pulled out a plain manila folder, and slid it across to her. She looked at it curiously, then at me. "What's this?" "Go ahead. Read." Her hand hesitated before opening the folder. Inside were printed screenshots. of her messages with Daniel, photos of their hotel bookings, time-stamped logs of every wine marketing trip they had taken together that never once resulted in a campaign. I didn't say a word. I let her absorb the full weight of her actions in silence. Her face drained of color. Her fingers trembled as she flipped through each page. "Elena," she began, barely above a whisper. I leaned forward, my voice steady, low, and final. Don't insult us both with some weak apology or an excuse you've been rehearsing. You knew what you were doing. You did it anyway. Tears welled in her eyes, but I felt nothing. Whatever part of me that once loved her as a sister had died. The moment she became the other woman in my marriage, I was lost, she tried. You and Daniel. You were always so perfect. No, Maya, I said, cutting her off. We were never perfect, but we were real. At least, I was. She reached across the desk as if to touch my hand, but I pulled back. You're done here, effective immediately. Your marketing contract is terminated, and I've already informed the creative team. You will not speak to any of our vendors, distributors, or staff again. And if you even think about contesting the termination, I will release every one of these documents to the industry. You won't get another agency job in California. Her breath caught. The illusion had cracked. Her empire of charm had turned to ash. I stood, walked to the door, and held it open. I trusted you, I said. That trust is gone. Now so are you. She left without another word. The next confrontation would be harder. Not because I feared Daniel, but because I had to look directly at the man who once held my heart and see the stranger he had become. That night, I waited until he came home late again. Another lie about inventory issues. Another text he tried to hide. I met him in the study, already seated with a second folder in front of me. He paused in the doorway, sensing the shift. Elena? Sit. His brow furrowed. He stepped forward slowly, cautiously. When he opened the folder, his reaction was immediate. Confusion, realization, and then panic. What the hell is this? Proof. Of everything. He slammed the folder shut and stood. You've been spying on me? No, I said calmly. I've been watching. There's a difference. I can explain. You're not going to, I interrupted, because I don't want your explanation. I'm not looking for closure or an apology. I'm looking for accountability. He laughed bitterly. So what is this? You want to punish me? No, I said, standing now. I want to remove you from my life, from the vineyard, from the brand I built with my own hands. You can't do that, he snapped. We built this together. I have rights. You waived those rights the day you broke our prenup, I said, pulling out the second document, our original prenuptial agreement, complete with the infidelity clause. Daniel's eyes scanned the page. I watched the color drain from his face as it had with Maya. You can't be serious, he said. I'm dead serious, and you should read Section 5. It outlines exactly what happens in the case of infidelity. Loss of community property, immediate divorce proceedings, and the option for me to buy you out of the company at a predetermined rate. His hands shook. You've been planning this. I've been preparing, I replied. There's a difference. He stood there for a long time, the silence stretching like wire between us. Then he sat again, shoulders slumped. So that's it? 20 years, and you just throw it all away? I wanted to laugh. Instead, I said, You already did. I'm just cleaning up the mess. He ran a hand through his hair. We were broken, Elena. We barely spoke. You buried yourself in the vineyard, in expansion, in everything except us. I nodded. And you buried yourself in my best friend. So forgive me if I'm not moved by your justification. He stood and tried a different tactic. Charm. We can fix this. We don't have to do this publicly. Let's go to therapy. Take a trip. Start fresh. I stared at him. The man who had betrayed me with lies now offered band-aids for wounds he had carved open himself. No, Daniel, I said. We're done, and you're going to sign the buyout papers. You'll receive your portion, per the terms in the prenup, and you will no longer have any role in Grayson Vineyards. He shook his head. You can't force me out over a personal matter. I'm not. I'm forcing you out over breach of contract, financial misrepresentation, and ethical violations. I found the payments to Maya's consulting firm, twice, the market rate. I found the hidden budget for those travel campaigns that produced nothing. That's embezzlement, Daniel. If I wanted to, I could press charges. He stared at me, stunned into silence. I'm offering you a way out, I continued. Sign the papers, walk away with what dignity you have left, and I won't destroy what's left of your reputation. He didn't speak for a long time. Then finally, You've really thought of everything. No, I said. I never thought I'd have to think like this. That night he left without signing. The next morning his lawyer called Grace. By the end of the week, the paperwork was finalized. Daniel Grayson, once the face of Grayson Vineyards, was now out of the picture. But I wasn't done. While Daniel was still trying to make sense of his sudden removal, I launched the final phase of my plan. I met with the legal team and the Vineyards board, presented the new structure of Alara Wines, and made it official. The brand would operate independently, carrying with it not just the legacy of our land, but the future I had built in secret. Visited each of our key distributors and sat down with them one-on-one. I told them the truth, not the scandal, but the vision. A vineyard led by a woman, rooted in resilience, driven by authenticity. They didn't just support me, they championed me. In one final twist, I sent Daniel a bottle of our new vintage under the Alara label. A single note attached read, "Here's to rebuilding, from the ground up." He never responded. I didn't need him to, because every time someone opened a bottle of Alara, they weren't just tasting wine, they were tasting defiance, reclamation, and the strength of a woman who had refused to be broken. And for the first time in years, the vineyard felt like mine again. Not because I'd taken it back, but because I'd finally let go of everything that never belonged. In the stillness of the early morning, I stood at the crest of the vineyard, a steaming cup of coffee in my hands. The fog was lifting off the rows of vines like ghosts retreating into the earth, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel haunted by what had been taken from me. I felt ready. Not for revenge in the way people imagine it, loud, dramatic, bitter, but for a kind of harvest, a reaping of everything I'd sown in silence. After Daniel signed the dissolution papers, the news traveled fast within our small industry circles. Rumors swirled, but I didn't offer explanations. I let silence protect my dignity, and let facts quietly speak where gossip shouted. He was no longer a co-owner, no longer the public face of the vineyard. His departure, though sudden to most, was simply the final fruit of seeds he had planted long ago. Alara Wines officially launched 3 weeks later. I had chosen the name not only for its mythological strength, but because it had no ties to him. No shadows, no history soaked in betrayal. It was my future, untouched by his fingerprints. The launch event was held in a small but elegant venue in Sonoma, filled with women winemakers, industry leaders, journalists, and a few quiet allies who had watched me work behind the scenes. I wore a deep emerald dress, bold but grounded, just like the message I intended to send. As I stood before the gathered crowd, I spoke not of my pain, not of the scandal, but of vision. I spoke of authenticity and craftsmanship, of women in wine finally owning the land they tilled, the brands they built, the legacies they were often excluded from. I spoke of what it means to rebuild, not in spite of betrayal, but because of it. What I didn't expect was the reaction. The speech went viral after a journalist shared a clip online. She turned heartbreak into harvest, the caption read. Comments poured in. Thousands of women from across the country wrote to share their stories, not all about infidelity, but about reclaiming identity, about being left behind and learning to lead themselves forward. Within days, orders for Ilara wines tripled. I partnered with a sustainability initiative that focused on female-owned vineyards. Our marketing campaign featured not polished ad copy, but raw journal entries I had written during those nights of silence, the confessions of a woman fighting to stay dignified while the world she trusted collapsed. People responded not to perfection, but to honesty. Vulnerability became my greatest form of power. Maya disappeared from the scene quietly. Her agency dropped her after internal emails surfaced, emails I had leaked anonymously, showing unethical billing practices and personal conflicts of interest in campaigns involving Daniel. Without my name to open doors for her, she found herself locked out of the same world that once adored her sparkle. Last I heard, she moved to Arizona, rebranding herself under a new name, trying to escape the cloud that followed her. Daniel fared worse. After being removed from Grayson Vineyards, he tried to save face by launching his own boutique wine label, but it flopped. The whispers had caught up to him. Investors hesitated, suppliers declined credit, and the distributors he once counted on had shifted loyalties. A few quietly admitted to me that while they liked Daniel, they trusted me. Trust is a currency, and I had earned mine with interest. He reached out once, just once, via email. It was brief, civil, almost pitiful. I hope you're proud of what you've built. I never saw you coming. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. In the meantime, Ilara Wines continued to grow. What had started as a whispered plan in my journal became a tangible force in the industry. I was invited to speak on panels, interviewed for leadership podcasts, featured in a Forbes article titled, "The Woman Who Turned Infidelity into an Empire." That one made me laugh. Not because of the title's drama, but because of how far I had come from the moment I sat paralyzed in front of that glowing iPad screen. But this story isn't just about me. It became clear, as my inbox filled with letters from strangers, that this wasn't only my pain. Betrayal wears many faces. Some people are cheated on by spouses, others by business partners, family, friends. But the aftermath is often the same. Self-doubt, rage, grief, a haunting. Question: was I not enough? I decided to build something more than wine. With the help of Grace, my lawyer, and now close confidant, I established a mentorship fund for women navigating personal loss while trying to start or rebuild businesses. We called it the Ilara Project. It wasn't charity, it was empowerment. We offered grants, workshops, legal consultations, and most importantly, community. I remember one night in particular. A woman named Felicia came to one of our gatherings. She had left an abusive marriage, was living with her sister, and trying to start a food truck business. Her hands trembled as she poured her story into the room. When she finished, the silence wasn't awkward. It was reverent. A dozen women stood and offered help, design support, connections, capital. Within 2 months, Felicia's truck was serving food in downtown Santa Rosa, wrapped in bright oranges and purples, bearing the words, "From the ashes we rise." This was no longer about revenge. It was about rewriting what it means to be ruined. One evening, I attended a private tasting at a competitor's vineyard in Healdsburg. The owner, a respected man in his 60s, pulled me aside and said something I will never forget. "Elena, I underestimated you. We all did. You've done something extraordinary here." I smiled, not from ego, but from something simpler. Peace. I had not set out to prove anything to anyone but myself, but I had. And now, the world was simply catching up. Later that same week, I walked into the same tasting room Daniel and I had once designed together. Stone walls, reclaimed wood beams, the faint scent of barrel-aged wine still hanging in the air. But everything else had changed. The team I led now wore the Alara brand proudly. The shelves bore our new vintages. Elegant labels, honest stories, a future no longer tied to a name I no longer wore. A tourist approached me, holding a bottle. She had a tear in her eye. "Are you her? The woman who built this after?" Nodded gently. She smiled. "You give me hope." That night I cried for the first time in months. Not because I was sad, but because I was finally free. Not from Daniel. Not from Maya. But from the illusion that my worth was ever tied to how others treated me. There is a kind of revenge that doesn't taste like fire, but like forgiveness. Not for them. For yourself. Forgiveness that says, I no longer need to carry this. Alara Wines would go on to win its first industry award just 8 months after launch. But that moment, the moment a stranger looked at me and saw not scandal, but strength, that was the real victory. I had harvested my vengeance. Now I was ready to plant something new. A year had passed. 12 months since I had sat in my kitchen, with a cup of espresso and an iPad that changed the course of my life. A full circle of seasons had gone by since the first day I looked at my husband, and no longer saw the man I thought I knew. And now, here I stood, on the deck of my new home nestled quietly at the northern edge of Napa Valley, overlooking a field of wildflowers and young vines not yet burdened by history. This home wasn't the one Daniel and I shared, and it wasn't the old Grayson estate with its weighty silence and stained memories. This was mine, entirely mine. The clean air carried only the scent of lavender and pine. The view was untouched, except for the faint trail that led to a workshop behind the house where I was learning to restore a vintage Vespa. I had no need for a motorcycle like Daniel's. I preferred something light, something that made no apologies, for being gentle. I had rebuilt my life, not perfectly, not without pain, but deliberately. The vineyard, Alara Wines, had now cemented itself as not just a successful label, but a statement. We had exceeded every projected revenue target, secured 2 international distribution deals, and expanded our tasting room to accommodate weekly storytelling events. Women from all walks of life came to sip wine and share their journeys. Some soft, some shattered, but all honest. There was something alchemical about it. The way trauma, when spoken, transformed into power. But the most unexpected part of this new chapter wasn't the success. It was the peace. I wasn't chasing validation anymore. I wasn't burning with revenge. I wasn't scanning every room for Maya's laugh or Daniel's cologne. They were no longer in my life, and more importantly, they were no longer in my mind. The weight of them had lifted slowly. So gradually I hadn't noticed it until I realized one morning that I'd slept through the night without dreaming of either of them. Word around town was that Daniel had taken a job consulting for a small winery in Oregon. His label had folded after just 2 releases. Maya, as far as anyone knew, had quietly tried to rebuild her career. But doors in this industry don't open as easily once people know your integrity is for sale. I felt no joy in their misfortune. Not anymore. What I felt was detachment, the gift of emotional distance, of no longer caring what the people who betrayed me did next. One evening, I returned to the annual Napa Valley Wine Gala, this time not as a wife or a supporting partner, but as a featured keynote speaker. Walking into that ballroom, I saw faces I hadn't seen in years. Some wore surprise, others, admiration. And a few, those who had doubted me, looked away entirely. I didn't blame them. When you rise after being cast aside, you become a mirror for everything others are too afraid to face in themselves. Daniel was there, Of course he was. Not at the center of attention, but lingering along the edges of the crowd. He wore a suit that no longer fit his stature. He had lost weight, but not the kind that makes a man look younger. He looked smaller, diminished. The woman beside him was beautiful in a careful sort of way. I didn't recognize her. She laughed too loudly at his jokes, and he smiled too hard. I watched them for one brief moment, then turned back to the stage. It wasn't my past I'd come to face. It was my future I was about to step into. My speech that night wasn't about betrayal. It was about truth. About how the vines we grow, like the lives we lead, demand pruning, patience, and courage. I spoke of what it meant to rebuild after everything you thought you needed was gone. I spoke of the women I'd met through the Alara project, like Felicia, now opening her second food truck, and Jean, a widow who launched a community garden in Oakland after her husband's passing. When I finished, the applause rose slowly, then all at once. It was thunderous. But more than that, it felt earned. Afterward, as I slipped out to the balcony to catch my breath, Daniel followed. "Elena," he said quietly. I turned, and for the first time in a long time, looked him full in the face without feeling that old knot in my stomach. "You look good," he offered. I nodded. "Thank you." He hesitated. "I saw what you've built. I've followed it. Alara, the speeches, the awards, it's remarkable." "It's real," I replied. "I just wanted to say..." He paused. I was wrong. About everything. I was weak. I was selfish. And I don't expect forgiveness, but I needed to say it. For a long moment, I said nothing. Then I looked at him and replied, "I've already forgiven you, Daniel. I just didn't do it for you." He blinked, caught off guard. "I did it for me," I continued, "because I didn't want to carry you anymore. I carried our vineyard. I carried your lies. I carried the weight of wondering if I wasn't enough. But I've set it all down now. That's what forgiveness is. It's not forgetting. It's choosing not to bleed every time you remember." He lowered his gaze. "I'm sorry it took losing you to see who you are." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. He wasn't saying it for me. He was saying it for the man he might still become, if he ever learned to walk without a crutch. I left him there on that balcony and returned inside. The lights were warm. My team was waiting. My future was waiting. In the months that followed, I continued to expand Alara Wines, but I also allowed myself to slow down, to breathe. I took a trip to the Italian countryside with Luca, my son, now finishing medical school, whose pride in me never wavered. We rode bicycles through hills of lavender, drank espresso in tiny cafes, and talked not about the past, but about possibility. He told me he wanted to open a free clinic one day. I promised to help him fund it. At night, I'd sit on the porch of my new home and write. Letters I never sent, dreams I once buried, poems I thought I'd forgotten. My journal filled with lines not about pain, but about becoming. About what? It means to bloom without asking permission. Healing didn't come all at once. Some days, I still woke with questions, with echoes of what-ifs. But most days, I woke with gratitude. Not for what I'd lost, but for what I'd finally made room to find. I was no longer the woman who waited to be chosen. I was the woman who chose herself, not in defiance, not in bitterness, but in reverence. That's where the light finds us, not in the victory, but in the quiet decision to start over without needing applause. This is the end of my story. But perhaps for someone listening, it's the beginning of yours. Rebuilding isn't about erasing the past. It's about planting something new in its ashes and watching it grow, slowly, beautifully, into something no one saw coming, including you. Looking back on the story of Elena Grayson, what began as a quiet unraveling of trust became a storm of transformation. It wasn't just a story about infidelity. It was a story about clarity, about the power of rebuilding when everything familiar collapses around you. And most of all, it was a story of ownership, not just of land or business or legal rights, but of identity. Elena had every reason to crumble. Her husband, Daniel, betrayed her with the one person she trusted beyond blood, Maya, her best friend, for over 15 years. It was a double-edged wound, personal and professional, intimate and public. Their betrayal wasn't just about physical infidelity. It was a theft of history, friendship, and partnership. They thought she'd react emotionally. They thought she'd be broken. But Elena chose something else. She didn't scream. She didn't fight for scraps of loyalty. She went inward, where strength lives quietly. She began to strategize, protect her assets, and plan not only her revenge, but her rebirth. Her transformation from co-founder of a shared vineyard to sole founder of Elara Wines wasn't an accident. It was the result of every silent, deliberate decision she made while Daniel and Maya were tangled in their lies, and her revenge? It wasn't explosive. It was surgical, legal, elegant, strategic. She removed them from her life without ever raising her voice. In return, she reclaimed not only her business and her home, but her name, her vision, and her power. Elara Wines didn't just become a success, it became a symbol, a quiet rebellion, a beacon for women who have been dismissed, betrayed, underestimated, or erased. Yet even that wasn't the real victory. The true triumph came in the calm that followed, the clean mornings on her vineyard, the quiet evenings where she journaled, not to process grief, but to celebrate growth. The relationships she built through the Elara Project, mentoring women who had survived their own private wars and were learning to turn wounds into wisdom. Elena's success wasn't revenge. It was reclamation. In the end, she forgave. Not to absolve Daniel or Maya, but to unchain herself from their memory. She forgave because she no longer needed their pain to fuel her purpose. Her life was no longer defined by what she had lost, but by what she had chosen to build. And that's the real lesson. Betrayal will find you, but it does not have to define you. When you are betrayed, you face a choice: collapse under it or rise from it. What Elena's story teaches us is that you don't need to prove your worth to the people who failed to see it. You only need to remember it yourself. And when you do, when you truly remember who you are, you don't just rebuild, you transcend. So how do we apply this to our lives? First, protect your peace. Elena didn't act out of impulse. She acted with clarity. In life, the most dangerous weapon you can wield isn't anger, it's awareness. Second, invest in your independence, emotionally, financially, and spiritually. Build something that is entirely yours, so that no matter who walks away, you remain whole. And finally, forgive, not because they deserve it, but because you deserve freedom. Let this story be a reminder. You are not what they did to you. You are what you do next. Let's interact. Mini quiz. What would you do if you discovered someone you love betrayed your deepest trust? A. Confront them immediately, even if unprepared. B. Pause. Gather your strength and make a plan before taking action. Comment your answer below, A or B, and tell us why. Let's open the conversation. Now we want to hear from you. Have you ever experienced a betrayal that changed you? What did you do next? What would you do differently? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your story might help someone else find their strength too. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you reflect on your own journey, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us continue creating powerful stories like Elena's, stories about truth, resilience, and reclaiming your life, one brave decision at a time.